Okay, I'll call the special regional council meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being streamed and recorded. Can I get an adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried. Business arising, outstanding items, the review of the 2020 preliminary budget in the municipality. Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're just going to continue on where we left off on Friday. Just as a point of business, just curious in terms of timing, do we have to do a hard stop at 1? Are we okay to House Council's schedules look today?
I'm fine past 1.
I'm fine past 1.
I can go past 1.
Okay, and just let me know when. I mean, we'll do a bit of a time check just around 1 issue, just see where we are and see if there's any opportunities in terms of continuing on there too. So just curious. So I'll just get rolling. So where we ended off, I think a couple slides after this, but I just wanted to kind of just refresh memories from discussions on Friday. So the 2021 tax levy without any adjustments would have sat at about 21,863,135. There were the BC Restart grant was used to offset anticipated lost revenues, because as was discussed, any revenues that are lost actually would inflate or create that levy to go up. So decisions of council in terms of landing fees and some lease waivers or reductions, and then of course just general revenue reductions is due to COVID. We anticipated about just over a $400,000 revenue loss into 2021. So we've utilized $409,000 of the BC Restart grant to offset those losses. So the adjusted tax levy currently is sitting at 21,454. As I mentioned, that's a couple $100,000 more than the 2019 tax or 2020 tax levy, sorry, but just a fraction above the 2019 tax levy, which is a little bit more apples to apples because last year we saw reductions of the rec center closure that occurred at the time we were going through budget deliberation. So we actually reduced the levy last year, the budget and expenses as a result of that. So, and as I'd mentioned, and we'll get into it as we go through, the intent to go through the presentation and then have discussions afterwards around opportunities with the levy. The grant was applied to offset expenses last year, and additionally to the BC Restart grant was utilized to offset the additional expenses that we saw last year, and also offsets reduced revenues that we saw last year. So we probably used somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 grand, somewhere around that neighborhood of that BC Restart grant. But that said, the council actually approved a good budget for last year, and it's a good news story that at the end of the year we didn't book a deficit, and we actually were able to book some surplus, which we are still closing the books, as I'd mentioned last week. And we also, on top of that, we also saw some cost savings, potentially in the neighborhood of $500,000 or $600,000 as a result of things that didn't occur after the budget was approved. So the rec center closure, for example, saw savings in personnel, saw savings in the materials and supplies, utilities, things of that nature were reduced. So what we've done, and again, we'll get into more detail here at the end, towards the end of the presentation, as council discusses some opportunities to offset additional costs this year, is we intend to put some of those funds into the financial stabilization reserve fund, which is a reserve fund we have. So it gives us the ability to take some surplus due to expenses that were reduced expenses that occurred last year as a result of savings, and then of course the grant that was applied. So it gives us an ability to put that in a stream so that we can track some funds that council can utilize moving forward. So for this year and potentially next year and maybe the year after, where they can help smooth out some costs and have an ability to reduce a bit of impact on the taxpayers. So we'll get into more detail with that. But when you look at this levy currently, there's an opportunity to reduce this further and below last year's ask. And we'll also have, if council wishes, a little opportunity to take a look and see what the impacts to the taxation would be and how it impacts the various tax classes too. So this is from, sorry, I got to fix something here. This is the same slide I showed last week. So this shows the reduction of the tax levy. This is the 2021 tax levy is with the $409,000 applied. And you can see generally over the years, we've seen a reduction of that required ask. And then the next slide, which we chatted about briefly too last week, shows the reduction of revenue. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword for the organization and for the community, where we're seeing a reduction in revenues. But if that reduction in revenues and combined be able to reduce that that tax levy is actually shows the work that's being done to reduce expenses and work on efficiencies internally. Because in theory, if everything remained equal and those revenues went down, as you see here, you would actually see a potential increase in your tax levy required, because you're reducing your revenues to offset your budget. Some notes to the 2021 budget. During the 2020 draft budget and the final budget adoption, Regional Council directed revisions to the 2020 budget to account for known short-term impacts of the current operational restrictions of COVID-19. So as I was previously mentioning here, the 2020 budget was adjusted mid-April with the following reductions. So we saw as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, revenues were reduced $61,000, wages $105,000 for $105,000, contract services for $33,000, and utilities for $22,000. So you saw a total expense reduction of $181,000, and when you offset the revenues, it brought the net tax reduction to $120,000, and that was the difference between the preliminary budget last year and what was approved by a budget in the final budget deliberations. 2021 to the notes, the budget for personnel. This year's budget includes a 1.9% increase to QP wages, as was negotiated as part of the 2020-21 collective bargaining agreement. It includes an anticipated 2.5% increase to the IFF wages based on contract settlements in comparative communities. And this doesn't include any wage changes to exclude staff wage grade. Contract services, you'll see a bit of a bump this year in contract services compared to last year. A bit of a bump is $463,000. A large portion is transferred from materials and supplies. So there was some budget items in previous years that were coded on the materials and supplies that in actuality should have been coded to the contract services. So there's $97,000 that has been moved from materials and supplies to the contract services. And then other areas that have impacted the contract services this year are the 911 costs. So there's $44,000 increase in 911 costs, which you will see in the fire department, in the fire department's budget. Our property insurance has gone up $115,000. One thing you can't control is insurance goes up each year, typically. The regional parks contract has gone up. We've budgeted $10,000 last year. When the budget was approved, we had a very low contract that was in place at that time for TETSA. Unfortunately, our service levels also saw a bit of a decrease with the budget amount too. This year, we've just upped the budget amount to represent typical costs that we typically see come in part of that tender for the TETSA campground. Additionally, there's increased costs that have been associated with implementing and supporting a shift to cloud-based data and services. Many of these projects have been brought forward as a result of COVID and the need to ensure continuity of service while reducing reliance on aging in-house infrastructure, i.e. server replacement. So we're currently transitioning to a cloud-based service to store a lot of our items. We're currently revamping our whole library and records, and that will be stored on the cloud. It reduces our dependency on our server, reduces our need to replace the amount of server capacity we currently have, and also improves or increases our security. So that's one example. And then, of course, some other contract services, janitorial services, for example, have increased this year also to the tune of $9,000 or $10,000 due to increased requirements due to the restrictions in the on COVID-19. So.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Just stop you there and see if there's any questions, Mr. Barry. Do we have any questions from council?
Yeah, I have a question.
Councilor Gerwing.
So going back to the parks, the increase to $10,000, if I remember correctly, the TETSA RFP has already been put out there, right? And
That's correct, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I forget when the closing date was, but I guess I'm just wondering if $10,000 is reflective, like, is it going to be enough based on the bids that we've seen submitted to date?
We want to see the bids because they're closed bids. So the packages have gone out. However, that said, it's an increase of $10,000. So we've put the budget back to where we've typically seen the bids at. Last year's bids were in that same range where we currently have the budget for, but we reduced the budget last year because we already had the bid packages in, and we were able to reduce the budget accordingly. And the low bid was significantly lower, to the tune of $10,000 lower than the other bids.
Okay.
So what we've done, So what we've done this year is we've increased the budget by $10,000 to reflect where we've typically seen the bids come in the past.
Okay, and given that we don't know, what COVID is going to continue to look like over the course of this summer season, and the huge uptake in the community utilizing Andy Bailey, are we looking at possibly increasing services at Andy Bailey, which would then necessitate a higher contracted fee there?
We have the budget, and I'll confirm just to see where we are, but based on my previous discussions with the rec department, with Harvey, and the fact last year we did increase some services out there, that's built into the budget to allow, because of course we do that currently with the internal staff out there. So we have some allowances in the budget to allow for that, but I'll go back and just confirm to make sure we got enough cushion in there.
Okay, like I think in particular too, because of all the rain we had, I think the contractor couldn't keep up with the grass cutting out there, which impacted those camping sites. So just something to consider.
Okay. Yep. No, for sure. Thanks. We're taking a note. We've noted that one. And TETSA closes Friday, Jaylee just confirmed. So the actual request for quotes.
Any other questions, councillors? Very well. Mr. Barry, could you continue?
So when you get to tab 4 in your binder, you'll see the Consolidated Departmental Operating Summary. We've broken it out. So when you look at, make sure my little, right here. So when you look at this column here under the total operating budget, this is the one I would suggest you focus on, because when you get over to transfers of bad debts and interest on long-term debt, et cetera, it starts to skew the numbers, and we get into a financial discussion versus where the expenses actually sit for 2021. So when you look at the expenses overall, 2021 expenses of $19,281,000 versus last year at $18,724. $18,724,000, sorry. So the $556,000 difference between one year to the next. The difference you'll see is $187,000 between the personnel wages, which is that those percentages I've previously communicated for the increases in QP and IFF. Services, you'll see an increase of 463. So that's those contract services. And as I previously mentioned, that $97,000 shift from materials and supplies and additional costs and under contract services, and a lot being COVID related, and some transfer of, some the cloud-based activities, being the server cloud-based program, and things like Zoom, DocuSign, all those things come at a cost. When you add them up, it increases. That's where they sit, is on those contract services. Supplies is sitting at $106,000 less than that last year, partially due to the fact that we moved $97,000 out of there. And then utilities, a minor increase. And again, it's based on where we see increases in gas and electricity costs or hydro costs, and then take a best guess to all in terms of what we might need to utilize for the year. So typically we see incremental increases each year. And don't hesitate to stop me anytime if you have any questions as we go through. This is just just shows a graph of the operating area by budget area. So it just does a breakdown of the various areas in terms of where the expenses are broken out. You'll notice that they're not necessarily by the operating area that you see in your budget. We actually broke them down, not by department, I should say, specific. They're actually broken out by the operating area. So for example, we separated the Public Works Department under transportation, and transportation would be Public Works and Airport, but water and sewer is separated from that. So you'll see with the water and sewer, what the percentage of the expenses, where they fall overall. Similarly, recreation includes the theater, for example, and the golf course, because it's under as an operating area, it's under operation or under recreation, culture, for example. So. Oh, yeah, and the heading should say 2021. It's not the 2020. It's not the 2020. As often as you review the document, it sits right under your nose and you don't see it, right? So now as we hit tab 5, you'll get the general government. So we're going to walk through the binder. We're going to do a general overview of the each area. And with the exception, you'll see at the within each department, you'll see the special projects listed. We'll do a quick snapshot of those. We're not going to get into the detail of the special project at this time. We'll decide, and council will decide how we want to do that after. So, general government changes to the general government budget include a transfer and centralization of many of the departmental IT purchases. So what we've been doing over the years is continually building in efficiency into our programs and ensuring that where we house or the line items where expenses are listed match where they should be from a financial perspective. So when you look at a bunch of IT purchases, it makes IT, for example, look like they're spending a lot of money, but they purchase all the laptops and desktops for the whole organization, for example. All of the software and licensing funnels through IT, but it's not an IT expense. It's a common services expense. So what we've been doing is we've been consolidating a lot of those expenses and making sure they fit under the proper umbrella or in the proper bucket within the organization. So that's occurred this year. We've seen, of course, an increase in janitorial due to increased cleaning of COVID-19 high touches, and you'll see on the document here a decrease of approximately $1 million in allowance for bad debt. The $1 million allowance for bad debt, we've increased our contribution this year to the IDCA annual contribution to ensure we contribute an adequate amount for our IDCA too. So we've offset some of those costs or those savings. So tab 6 shows the operational budget. The difference you're seeing this year on this document versus previous years is you used to see that little special budget line, and then you'd see an overall expense line. We've changed that this year just in an effort to make it less confusing for everyone when they read, especially for council and the public. So the expenses are basically we still have that year-to-year comparison where it's apples to apples for the most part. We've completely just separated out the costs for the special projects. So here again, you'll see this is where the majority of the shift between the materials and supplies has occurred from one year to the next. So the council indemnity, which is something that council can chat about. We can at the end of this. We left the council budget the same. We typically don't change the council budget unless there's direction from council. So this year, last year, the budget remained the same. Things like travel, meals remained the same. Very little of that budget was used, if any, with the pandemic. Sorry, Jane? The conference budgets weren't used, of course. UBCM and NCLGA, for example. And similarly, we've left that in again for this year. Council can elect to reduce that, and or also carry funds from last year of unused funds to help offset funds from this year if you wish to impact the to look at. So I have that as a note for the end of the presentation. We can talk within the presentation, or council can chat about it now. It's up to yourself how you'd like to proceed.
Let's leave it to the end.
Okay. So you'll see council indemnity is remain the same. Wages and benefits, slight reduction. The contract services have gone up. That's the general government budgets where we've seen the biggest hit. That $97,000 have transferred for the most part. That transferred from materials and supplies. And then additionally, those other items, especially those IT items with the cloud-based storage, all those things that we do currently, especially from a virtual perspective, get housed under the common services, which sit under the general government budget. You'll see the reduction in materials and supplies, which again is that it's specific to that switch from material into contract services. A slight increase of utilities. And then, of course, you'll see the difference between 2020 budget and the 2020 budget, 21 budget for the transfers of bad debt. So about an $892,000 reduction there from one year to the other. Sorry? Oh, and sorry, yes. I have it here in my notes. So what is not in this budget yet, too, also is, which would go in the council budget, is the coalition has not been put into this. That's again a discussion. We have it for a note for council to discuss after I'm done with the presentation. So there's a $38,484 expense that's not in the current budget for membership of the coalition. We figured we'd ask council if they'd like it in. An option could be to put it into the budget and then decide at the budget deliberation after you see the final numbers if you'd like to, and then at that point you can decide if you want to approve it or not also. But again, that's for discussion at the end of the budget. Thanks, Aaron. General government special projects. Like I said, I won't go into the special projects. If council wishes, we can get into each specific one, but I thought what we could do is go through each department and then we can get into the special projects afterwards if council wishes to get into more detail. Just generally, we've got the municipal website design, which is carryover funds, software upgrade to a PLL module, asset retirement obligation project, which Ryan will be quite excited to talk about that one. Virtual City Hall, our GP cloud service, so another example of switching into a cloud-based service versus our dependency on our server. So it's an impact of, so out of that is $163,000 of expenses for the special projects. Of that, $83,000 of carryover, so it's a net tax levy impact of $80,000. When we get into protective services, changes to the protective service budget are minimal, basically, with the exception of the 2.5% increase in the wages for the IFF. The contract for the operational contract for 911 service, that's where you'll see that $44,000. So that'll bump up their contracted services. And there is an increase of $10,000 in materials and supplies to the fire department related to COVID-19, because obviously their protocols have changed significantly, much stricter even than what the general provincial protocols are, and based on what the fire commissioners had done. So when you look at year-to-year change, 2020 to 2021, there's an increase of the wages of $44,000. That also has a slight bump with additional admin help over there, just due to the amount of protocols and what they have to deal with due to the current COVID requirements to meet the requirements that the fire department has. Contract services up by 69. Good portion of that is the 911. Materials and supplies, which was mentioned again, additional materials and supplies related to COVID. Overall, the budget is 123,000 over 2020 budget, or 6.2% increase. Oh, sorry. Protective services special projects. The EOC capacity building, Indigenous awareness training, and ESS capacity training were all grant funded projects. And then the Bearware is pre-approval from council for 6,000. So out of the $66,000, 60,000 of it is carry forward funds from government transfers. So there's a net tax levy of $6,000. RGP, Regional Development and Planning, changes to this budget. Again, you'll see the majority of our budgets have not seen huge increases or changes from year to year based on the fact that we're providing similar service levels as previous. The one change you'll see in Regional Development Planning is the $6,000 for contract services for qualified building inspector relief coverage. As of February of this year, there's the new legislation that's coming into effect that requires your building inspector and building inspections to be done by a qualified individual. It's something that's been in the works for a number of years now. Our building inspector is qualified and has his certification, but he also is going to take some vacation this year. And in the past, we would do inspections internally in-house and have Sean take a look at it when he came back. We're no longer, the legislation doesn't allow us to do that anymore. So we actually have to have relief if we're going to do any inspection. So it's an agreement most likely we'll have in place with a neighboring community to give us some aid. And of course we need to pay for that. So additionally, within the budget this year, we've taken Edison out of a special project because if it happens year after year and it's part of your process, then it's an operational item. So we've taken out of special projects and we've put it into the operational budget. So that would additionally increase the contract services piece. And then a new budget amount of $8,000 for the community forest alternate director as per council resolution is also part of that budget. So when you take a look at that, wages, a slight increase of $5,000, contract services, $19,000, materials and supplies are down $7,300. So just a minor increase from 2020 to 2021. A lot of work going on in the background when it comes to special projects with our regional development planning department. You look at the total expenses. Again, this is something we can review later if council wishes, and Doug's on standby to go through and review these projects. Some you'll recognize, some many are carry forwards. Total expenses are $909,000. Out of that, there's $335,000 of a carryover. When you factor in government transfers, you are $451,000. Some fees and charges of $1,200. Out of that $909,000, $761,000 does not impact the net tax levy. So out of it, $148,000 is levied through taxation. You're bouncing around, Jay. For recreation facilities, changes to the recreation facilities budget include a large increase. So the big chunk of the insurance cost increase we saw actually occurred over at rec. So the large increase to property insurance premiums in 2021 has resulted in a 43% increase applied towards the recreation insurance costs. So it's an $89,000 increase to the contract services. Recreation revenue has been estimated at lower levels, so we have reduced what our anticipated revenues levels will be. And with the ever-changing restrictions, of course, it's difficult to predict what that will look like. And then, as was previously mentioned, the rec parks, regional parks budget contract has been set to pre-2020 contract amounts, reflecting what we've typically seen previously, the cost to operate the park. We've also included on this one here, you'll see the budgets. We've included the 2019 budget as a comparator because of the changes we made last year and the reductions that we made, obviously with the facility being closed at the time, and we reduced, as I mentioned, that $120,000 worth of expenses. Or sorry, 180, I think, of expenses, and when you factor in the revenue, it showed a difference of for the net tax levy of 120. We obviously will be over that this year compared to last year. So when you look at the actual operational budget, we actually put in the 2019 budget, which we haven't in other areas. So you can see that the actual budget for the rec facility in 2019 was 5870, and we're looking at about 5451 for this year. Last year's budget, 2019 actual was sitting around 5324. So that's just a comparator to try to compare a little bit more apples to apples in terms of cost versus I'm looking at what we did last year. So overall, the wages and benefits are a little bit less than last year. And again, that's not a reflection of reducing what's occurring at the rec center itself. It's moving some budget numbers around. Costs, for example, to maintain the community trail, for example, used to sit on the rec. That's now been transferred to public works, for example. So we're aligning costs to who's doing the work. Back in the day, a lot of the rec staff did do the work. It's transitioned to public works, so that's where it's sitting now. So we haven't actually cut that cost at the rec center. It's been transferred to a different department.
Okay, I'll just stop you there and see if there's any questions from council. Very well. I have one question here. Contract services for the rec center for 2021, 622,875, where the actual in 2019 was 445. Why the increase in the contract services for the rec center was considerable amount?
Well, close to 100,000 of its insurance.
Okay.
Right. So that's a big amount.
So that's contract services?
Yep.
Insurances?
Anything that you don't touch or hold, we pay for as a contract services. So
Okay.
so when you break it down, personnel is labor costs. So internal labor costs, not external. Materials and supplies is anything you buy or purchase. And then services would be contract services, anything you purchase or buy as a service. So plumbers, electricians, all training. Yeah, any training would be contract services.
And so insurance is in there as well. It just seems to be odd to have insurance lumped in there with things like plumbers and contractors.
It's a contract service.
Contract service. Okay.
So when you look at the financial statement, when you look at our information, you'll drill down and you'll see where it's broken out.
Yeah.
But it all gets lumped up and rolled under contract services. That's how.
Think of the category more contract/service, not contracted service.
Okay.
Yeah, think of it more as a contract slash
And services.
It's
Okay.
services, net services. So it's anything you purchase that you can't touch or hold. If you
Okay.
buy it and you hold it, then it's material. If you buy it and it's a service that's provided, it's under that services. So that's essentially how it is.
Councillor Penny.
Is that an increase of insurance of 100,000, or is just the total is 100,000?
The increase was
It's increased to 100,000?
89,000, I think was the number I said
Yeah.
earlier, yeah.
That was the increase?
Overall for the facility or for the organization, I think was 115, I think I said earlier.
That's the increase, yeah.
And then I think 89 was impacted the rec facility. The rec facility took the lion's share of that.
What is the
30% increase in insurance this year. So municipal insurance for facilities across Canada have skyrocketed. In BC, there was a number of big claims in the last couple of years. So there was actually a huge challenge this year in even securing insurance for the municipality. It came down to the last minute. We had some quotes come in that actually would have been another 120,000 more than we actually paid this year. And one company literally only would go to 70% securing us. And it was like a last minute. We got an extension, but then we did secure it right at the end of December that it was decreased by that amount. So the overall quote that come in was 500,000 for the municipality, and it ended up our final amount for the municipality was 380,000 is what our insurance costs are.
So our insurance premium for the entire municipality is $380,000. That's our premium we pay.
That is for our building insurance. That doesn't include all the other insurance pieces.
Thank you.
Please.
Councillor Goring.
Two questions. Number one, are we still with the Municipal Insurance Association?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And a second question, back to the rec center. And I haven't gone page by page yet through all of it, but is the aquatic center seeing any increase in training dollars given the lack of lifeguards that we are continue to experience? So I'm just thinking, I know that we are trying to train homegrown lifeguards, and I'm just wondering if there's an increase to that training budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's an increase and there's communication occurring with the school. I believe it's going to be, they're going to try to do it in the spring, but the school can make it happen. So I believe it's September now. It's going to happen here. Just to
Yeah,
go
well,
back
given
to your,
The term
Is that-
2 has started for the school. I don't think that that's a possibility this year, right? But hopefully we can get back on track to doing it through and with the school next school year. But in the meantime, I'm still hoping that we are doing a local NLS training.
we're trying. The challenge we're running into too is just, it's interesting. Well, yeah, so part of that is, and again, it's probably for a separate discussion or whatever, but at the end of the day, the challenges that they're having at the pool is actual training in general, even for the existing staff to research, because COVID is delayed. So they've actually extended current certifications in terms of expiries on certifications. Life Saving Society, I'm assuming, is that who it is?
Yeah.
The Life Saving Society has, because there's training that's not occurring, and they're trying to figure out how to provide training because of travel restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So we're encountering some challenges there, but the intent is, on top, in addition to the school training, is to also reach out and do some training also. But again, there's some boxes we have to tick in the meantime.
Thank you.
Back to your original question, sorry, when you asked for part of it, we actually are a member of MIA. So we actually have MIA, but MIA is who provides our building insurance. Western Financial provides our building insurance. MIA provides our liability insurance.
Oh, okay.
The Municipal Insurance Association provides liability insurance for the municipalities in BC. So things like, so they'll, rec programs, or they'll do inspections of playgrounds and things like that around the, provide training to staff based on liability, mitigating liability concerns. The actual facilities insurance is through Western Financial as a broker, and they go out and look at various insurance companies based on the broker for that. That's who uses their broker.
And MIA doesn't provide that facility building insurance then? That's just liability that they focus on?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I hear different, or if I find out different, I'll let council know.
Okay, thanks.
You come down.
Yeah.
Very well. Darlene Mosel is our agent, is she not? Is she still active,
I
or
think
did she
she stepped
retire?
back a little bit, but she's still involved.
Okay.
She's reduced, I think, her scope in terms of her customers, but I think she still has us on her.
Darlene officially retired in December, so
There you go.
she's still available, but she's transitioning out right now, and we do have a new person in there that has worked with Darlene for a number of years. So
There you go.
Yeah, I know Darlene, and I think she does great work, but yes, I'd heard that she was retiring, so. Well, Mr. Barry, carry on.
And we've had good service from Darlene and from Western Financial, and like I said, we do shop around, and if we looked, if we went back to Western, continued on with Western Financial about 2 years ago, and that's when we actually had a reassessment of all the facilities to ensure that we weren't underinsured too. So, Public Works budget, the changes to the Public Works budget this year are quite minimal financial impact. The current service levels are still going to continue on at Public Works each year. We look at opportunities to, as has been through the years, to continue to look for efficiencies when it comes to equipment and processes, to reduce costs or help mitigate costs. And then we we build in a little bit of risk into that budget, but we don't have a lot of risk built in, but we have the ability to cover our bases if we have some significant events or weather events occur, for example. So you'll see a minimal financial impact to public works operations as a result of COVID-19, mainly because, again, they still have, of course, the protocols to follow, but not the same impact you'd see at the rec facility with the public. The public works building has basically, since the pandemic occurred, has been the public has been restricted from that area. So then it's just the protocols related to the staff. Slight decrease in the water utility revenue and small adjustments between programs. So as in previous years, you have a number of programs within public works and water, sewer, example, roads, et cetera. And within each year, we just try to align actuals with what we expect for that year. So you might see numbers fluctuate within those programs, but overall, the number generally, and you'll see here, we're basically on the same budget as last year overall. When you look at the 2020 versus 2021 budget. Public Works only has the one special project, which is the only one that's not linked to capital or linked to the IDCA. So that's municipal asset management planning and process planning, which was a approved grant. And so $65,000 budget and $50,000 of that is grant funding. So you'll see there's an impact of $15,000 for to the tax levy. Airport change to the airport 2021 budgets from 2020. The greatest change is a result of COVID. So the biggest change at the airport, which you won't see on the next page, is because of course we're reviewing expenses, but is a reduction in the in revenues, and a significant impact of that is the landing fees. So there's an anticipated reduction of 51% in the airport revenues this year based on where we currently are. And so the net impact of reduced revenues is a 20% increase to the budget. And when I say net impact, your net impact, and you'll see it in your binders, what your net impact to the tax levy essentially would be because of that reduction of the revenues. The budget, the expenses themselves, from 2020, it's had a $1.4 million budget, and it's been reduced to 1.370, and you've seen a reduction of supplies of 43,000. Materials and supplies of 43,500. And sometimes that's a case where we can carry some of the supplies over from one year to the next, and we didn't use the inventories. We used a significant amount in January. We had the freezing rain. We probably pushed $20,000 worth of chemical to the airport to get the runways back open when we had the freezing rain. Just to put it in perspective, how fast we can chew through costs out there for materials and supplies. Airport special projects, which is a previous project linked to, CAM and group. I'll say Quest. Is it Quest? Yeah. Airport refueling relocation project. So that's a grant that we worked in conjunction or on behalf of that group, and it was approved, and it flows through the municipality. But it's being dealt with by Quest. Community groups, the big four have already presented to council. So just a quick summary of those: the library budget is 28,000 less than their 2020 due to the reduction in their expenses. The theater is 10,000 less than their 2020 budget, and the museum is 104,000 over their previous budget. So when you look at the tax levy, $104,000 of the increased tax levy this year is from, one of it is a museum budget, because they've compared to previous years or recent years, I should say, requested and asked for the full $200,000 amount, which they've done historically in the past, which is an increase of $104,000 versus over last year. Additionally, when you go through the other groups, SARS, who will fall under the community organizations. So SARS, TRAC, so the Toad River Area Club fall under other organizations, for example. SAR's request was originally for $550. And they came back, I believe, last week, Ryan, and changed the request to $35,000. That isn't in this budget because all the information was already out when it was requested. Ryan is going to forward on the information to council. I believe it was for an acquisition or looking for an acquisition of some sort of building. And was there training involved in that one also, or not, Ryan?
No, so I'll email out the updated budget documents. They have a complete package submitted late, and it just outlines the acquisition and maintaining either a building or a lease. But it doesn't mention the training, which historically their budget has been for training, and that was why it was reduced this year. Is with COVID, they didn't anticipate any training for this year. So I will email that out.
Question?
Councillor Gerwin.
Thank you.
Councillor Gerwin, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I noticed in the package that we got, keeping in mind, I know this is draft, but under SARS, they had not completed the municipal grant application. So has that been rectified then?
Yes, that is actually what created the change. Is I had sent an email back to them asking to get that application, and the numbers were different, so they had submitted a secondary proposal. So we do have a full package with that application now that I'll email out.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Mayor. So when you look at community groups as a whole, the 2021 budget was $896,462 versus the 2020 of $858,576. So a difference of $37,000. Essentially, the additional request that the library had offset some of the savings from other organizations, and of course, unless otherwise given direction from council, the ask from SARS will be changed in the document for budget deliberation. So you'll see that number increase another $35,000.
Sorry, I have another question.
Councillor Gerwin.
I also know under the Peace Liard Regional Arts Council, under the statement of operations that they have included, I noticed that neither the Dawson Creek government, local government, or the Fort St. John local government, they don't contribute funds to the Peace Liard Regional Arts Council. And I'm wondering if I've just missed it within there, or if somebody can find an answer to that question for me. And I'm just wondering if in fact they don't, why?
Ryan can look into it. My assumption is going to be both Dawson and Fort St. John have different practices when they fund nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
I'm going to think. Yeah, and Jaylene saying that both Dawson and Fort St. John do have their own arts and culture centers. Maybe that's the reason why. But Ryan will check into it, and they'll see if there's any other information. I do know Fort St. John, or from information that went to previous communication with the previous CAO a couple of years ago, I know they were looking at, based on their council direction, they were taking a different approach in terms of their grant and aids, which is essentially what or grant process to community organizations, because they had so many of them. So that might be one of the reasons too, but I don't have that specific information.
Okay, I'm just kind of curious as to, North Peace or Peace Liard Regional Arts Council. And then if that's not funded in any way by local government, is that reflective if the only local government is Northern Rockies that's contributing? And I know it's not a big ask, and I'm not saying that I'm not in agreement, absolutely am, but just wondering about that.
And Aaron's just looking through the documents, and it looks like the PRD does fund them $10,000.
The Peace River Regional District funds them for $10,000.
Okay, thanks.
When we get to tab 24, that's where you'll see all of the capital. And as I said, this year, what we've done is we've separated the capital out into their funding areas. and separated it from the individual departments. So it's a tab on its own. The capital, it starts with all the capital projects and then it goes into the renewal projects. I'll just slide over to the last piece again, chat about next steps in terms of council and how they want the information communicated and what they want to go through. Sorry. Yeah.
The TAC request was part of the community groups.
Yeah,
Do you want to bring that up now or after capital?
I will. I have it here. Yeah. So I'll, yeah. This TAC is actually would be the community group. TAC would be part of it. So
It should have been part of the
it
planning.
would go in their planning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have it in my list here.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So the tab, as I said, has all the capital laid out, and we can get into detail later if council wishes to go individually by each project. Basically, the total expenses of the capital is 33,178,000, which will include all the ACAP requests and any grant fund requests. And so any capital that we have, either that's in process, so carry forward, for example, or anything that's in the queue from a ACAP perspective, would be in this expense line right here at 33 million. Carryover funds of 1.466 to look after projects that are currently in the works. Government transfers of 23 million. So that would be either government transfers of grant funds that aren't approved yet. So ACAP, for example. So, a runway ACAP project would show the government transfer, would show the expense under the expense line in the government transfer. There's transfers from the M&E, the Mobile Equipment Fund, Reserve Fund. So there's a plow truck this year. We're finally going to have to break down and purchase a plow truck. Old Unit 28 is finally starting to show its age. And we've pushed that one probably 5 years past its due date. So bottom line is that the $33 million expense, $25 million of it is either from grants or carryover funds, which leaves us, and again, this is a bit of a typo, the net tax levy wouldn't be 7.935 that you see here. The net tax levy would be 5 million, reduction of 5 million from that, because that's the $5 million from the IDCA agreement. So the levy for the full capital program would be about $2.935 million. That summarizes, or sorry, kind of looks after the general overview of the budget where we sit. We have to thank you here. Aaron grabbed the slide deck and put the pictures in, and a big thank you to the Fort Nelson Public Library for the use of the photos in the presentation. A bit of a change versus previous year. I think it was great to see some of the historic pictures. Yeah, it was kind of neat. And there's a link here in terms of where you can find those archived pictures at the Fort Nelson Public Library. So I thought that was neat. Some housekeeping. So the general discussion, I guess, in terms of departmental operating budgets, did you want to go into the detail? Did you want in terms of the operating budgets themselves, or was the overview adequate for council? So just questioning that one.
I found the overview was fine for all the departments, but if there's anything that any individual councillors want to go in depth, if they want to voice their opinion, and then we can simply go in depth to whatever department the operating budget you're curious about is. Councillor Roper.
I'm fine with the overview. That was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed the photos being included. I think the public will enjoy those as well. It makes it a little more digestible with all the numbers. So thank you very much.
I would note that we're missing three councillors today. So if they wanted to go in depth in one of the operating budgets, we'll just do it as we go through this. Councillor Gerwing?
I'm good with the overview. Can read what's in the binders, and I'm assuming when we go to have our votes, we'll have a discussion then. So I'm good with the overview. It was great. Very well done, easy to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Penny, any comments? You're good?
Same as others. I'm
Okay.
perfectly fine with the overview.
In terms of so that's for the operational piece. In terms of the special projects and capital projects, what's council, did you want to go through them? I mean, we will be going through them project by project as part of the budget deliberation, but did you want to have them done as part of this process in terms of the also?
I'm fine with just doing them as part of the presentation that we're going through. Any councillors want something more than that? Councillor Gerwing?
All the information is in the binder, right? There isn't anything that isn't in the binder or
Well,
being set by Ryan that we would need to know.
No, yeah. So what we've done different this year to try to reduce duplication of efforts, especially the process of going through each individual project, is we've learned from previous years and add more. So this year the prelim budget includes the pinks and the justifications. So all the projects, the special projects and the capital projects all have the justifications in there as part of those pinks. So they're there. There you'll see a draft watermark on them only for the sake that there's going to be might be some information that we might want to tighten up, or of course, edit based on grammar, etc. So we're still working on that in the background. But in terms of can you look at a project and see what it's all about? Yes, you can.
Okay.
So given that all the information is there and available to the council, and if they want more detail, they can simply come back and ask for it. I think we're
Yes.
fine.
Yeah, and in previous years, as we've done, I mean, if there's a question, we're available. Do not hesitate to email or give me a call, or Ryan or Aaron. And if we don't know the answer when you're calling, we'll definitely find out. But yeah, don't hesitate if there's some clarification you need or anything specific to that.
Okay.
Ryan will also be sending out 3 or 4 supplementary documents, including council's legislative budget that lays out your budget as per operating area, i.e. Travel, meals, hosting, sort of thing for you to look at, and that's your detailed budget. We'll also be sending out a list of the specific training that's going to be in the budget, so the specific training amounts. The tax levy comparison by communities will also be coming your way. That's an annual thing that's included in your budget. Did I miss anything, Ryan?
And the capital summary from a AIDP perspective. So AIDP is complete already, as well as the tax comparison. So those will be in the lock boxes and also available. I can also add those on the email on top of that too. So
Will all this information be made available to the public as well?
It'll be part of the document.
Okay.
Yeah, the updated document.
Well, we can, some of these are intended to be inserted to your budget binders, because right now those tabs are empty in your binder. So when we do that, we'll replace the electronic version on the server on the website for everybody to see.
Good,
Okay.
thank you.
Question.
Councillor Gerwing?
That was my point. So everything that Ryan said, and I would like a paper copy of all of that, not just an email.
Yep, it'll be in your lock
Yep.
boxes.
And then I would make the assumption that once I receive the email, that's when I know I can come into the municipality and pick up my paper copy. Yes?
Yep, that's a good assumption.
Thank you.
And we'll hole punch it.
Oh, you sweet. Thank you. I do have a whole bunch of notes. Okay.
Throw the little Timbit things into the worm bucket. So there was 3 requests that aren't in the document currently. So the coalition's one for the 38,000, the SARS for so search and rescue, the additional $35,000 request instead of the 500. And then the Tourism Advisory Committee also put a request in last week, which isn't in the planning budget, for $5,000. And I think it's a reasonable request. It was for a familiarization tour up the highway and just some expenses as part of operating their committee. So that came in from one of the co-chairs last week from Bev, requesting if they after they did their had the reading last week or the week before. So that again, the document was provided to council prior to the information. So those 3 items my thought is that when we provide the information to the public and for council deliberation, that those items go into the document, including the SARS one. And then council would decide, obviously, when deliberation occurs, if they would want, that's one option, I guess. Or so I'm just asking if that's something you'd like to see, or would you like to leave the document as is and decide at the time? Because it can always be inserted when council's going through the budget deliberations also. We can just note it as we have now.
I think as long as we can deal with them at the deliberations, I think we're good on all three of those. The detail will be forthcoming on all those as well.
Yes, so
Just-
council's aware already on the coalition piece.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that information's been provided previously and you wanted to make a decision, and that decision based on what the communication from the coalition has been, that's a 3-year commitment, of course. So of 38,000 per year. And then the SARS request is going to go out here shortly. And then the tourism advisory was just a request for $5,000 to be added to which would be put into the regional development and planning budget. So, and they're looking to meet with council March 8th also. Yes.
Okay, so we'll be getting the details on those.
And I believe-
Any other?
Sorry, I thought the Councilor Gerwing had a question, but you were probably asking that.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question is I would like to receive the paper, the applications or the emails, the justifications beforehand, just so that I can digest the information before I'm required to make a vote on it.
Okay.
Absolutely, you'll get that.
Thank you.
So I'm clear. So those 3 items we want put as part of the package. We want adjust the package that's going out to as part of the public engagement piece here. So leave those out of the budget.
Yeah.
Mm,
What's your pleasure, councillors? We can either include it, and I mean it. In the long run, we're going to be making a vote on these anyway. But whether to include it in the package that's going out or to exclude it and vote on it separately, I think we should probably include it in the budget, and then we can always, if these things are voted down, then they just come back out of the budget. It's better than excluding it from the budget and then trying to shove it back in.
That was my thoughts. I think it's better to include it in your budget document, and then we can acknowledge the increase. The increase is just under $100,000.
Yep.
Which would impact the levy. What the next conversation we're going to have here right now too is about the levy.
Does anybody have any objection to that, including it in the budget, and then at some point, if we decide against, we pull it back out again?
No, I think it's important to include it. Like, I wouldn't want to go before the public knowing that there's 3 items that we're considering that we haven't put out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, so that's good enough consensus that we included then? Okay.
So there'll be some amendments to the document. So we'll sit with Ryan afterwards. It'll change the cultural groups. It'll change the regional development planning one. So there'll be some flow through. So it'll be some paper shuffling for your budget binder.
So what we might do then is wait to distribute these new pieces until we can give you all the new pieces.
No, that makes sense.
So then you're not
Yeah.
trying to do it in stages.
Yeah, and we'll tell you which tab to put them in and replace them.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
that works, Councilor Going. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Okay, last but not least is going to be an interesting discussion. So I'm going to do a time check here. Is everyone okay still for time? 1:00, it's just after 1 here.
Your last item, how long will that be, Mr.
Well, it
Berry?
depends on how
Estimate?
fast you want to make a decision. Then we
Well-
don't have to do it, but I think it's good to broach discussion today.
Sure.
Because basically what we have is we've received that $1.5 million BC Restart grant from the province. And last year we applied. So our job as staff and to the financial piece is to ensure that we utilize that grant and meet the eligibility requirements of the grant. So when you look at our expenses last year and the revenue losses, we were able to apply close to 900,000, about $900,000. I believe 930 was the number. Somewhere around there, we were able to apply for last year's, towards last year's expenses and offset revenues. Additionally, we saved about just in the neighborhood, and again, we're still working to the numbers, but just over $600,000 in expenses. Just due with regards to savings with things that didn't occur. The rec center was down longer, the rec center continued to be down after the budget was approved. So there were savings there, and so on and so on. So last year when the budget was approved and council approved the budget, there were cuts that were made. It was a very aggressive budget. But at the same time, there was discussions around if there was an opportunity to be able to give back to the community and to provide some tax relief in the future, that would be taken into consideration. The budget was well done last year, and council, it's a good news story in regards to financially. We didn't book a deficit at the end of the year, even after, before we even look at that BC Restart grant. So compared, and I brought it up before, compared to other organizations, we were in reasonable shape financially. So what we're discussing to do internally, and want to chat with council, is the funds that we utilized and went into to the offset expenses last year, and the revenues from the grant, and additionally the reduction of expenses due to things not occurring, like i.e. rec center not opening. Those funds we'd like to put those into the financial stabilization reserve. And then council has the ability then to take some of those funds and help offset the budget levy, the required levy for this year, to offset some of those expenses for this year, and possibly future years. So after this year, I'll go into this year. Currently, we're sitting with we have about $409,000, I believe, is what we put into we utilized from the BC Restart grant, and council has the ability to take additional funds that are available to them and reduce that levy. And a starting point would be, I say, $1.5 million in terms of access to funds, but that number is going to fluctuate. We'll confirm what that looks like. I wouldn't suggest you'd use a full amount in 2020 or 2021 to offset your levy, mainly because you're going to probably need some funds for next year too to probably offset. It's good to smooth it out. It's probably good to smooth it out over the next 2, if not 3 years. But there is an availability if council wishes to put an additional $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on the levy this year, if you wished, to help reduce the tax burden. And Aaron has a little bit of we've developed a bit of a spreadsheet here, which I can stop sharing here for now. Because what we'll do is we can show you where the tax levy currently is, and then provide some options for council to impact that tax, the show impacts to that tax levy, and also where those impacts are, how they affect the various tax classes. So an example would be if you applied $1 million of funds to reduce the tax levy, when you think about that document in the presentation that says 84% of the tax levy comes from industry, then out of $1 million, $840,000 is getting back to industry.
Yep.
So we've done a quick little, so when we look at the funds available, we originally started out with 1.507 for the Restart grant. Of course, those funds, over 900,000, were expended last year, were utilized last year. But what it did is, of course, it helped offset some expenses, which at the end of the day, we were underspent accordingly, right? So what we were thinking is that the funds that we utilized last year, we would carry forward from last year into this year, or for future years. And so they don't get mixed up just with surplus. And from a financial perspective, that's our job to make sure the funds are adequate. that's where we can utilize that financial reserve fund just to be able to track what we're using from funds that were able to capture from previous years. So if you start off the current, so if you get your little pointer, good. So if you look at 21,863,000, that's where the levy started. And then we were able to use $409,000 of the BC Restart Grant to offset the revenues, which brought the levy where it currently is at 21,454, based on the document you currently have. Of course, there's some additions going to that based on our discussion with the TAC request, the SARS request, and the coalition. What do you have here? The new recommended levy. What am I seeing here? I'm sorry. Can we hide this? What do you got going on?
So this is the number you can put.
Council can play with whatever number they want, actually. 348, just ignore the 348 for now. The 1 point, so rough and dirty, council has minimally $1.5 million of funds to play with right now. And on top of that, with the reduction of some costs last year that didn't show up as an expense, you're in the neighborhood of an additional 600 minus the 409. So if an easy round number to look at right now is around that 1.5, 1.6. We can confirm what that looks like later, but it's just from a round number perspective. Let's just sit at say $1.5 million. Some suggestions to look at would be to take a portion of that into this year and you got to think about the rebound effect too when the funds are done. So if you have $1.5 million to play with this year, if you take 750, for example, in addition to and add it to if you were to add that to the levy this year, you got 750 left, you add it to next year's levy or to reduce the levy, you've got a pretty significant rebound effect in year 3 because you don't have anything to offset your levy, and costs are going to typically continue to go up unless we reduce service levels. So one recommendation is when Aaron talks at 348, that just brings a round number to say, brings us to 757. It takes half of that the original 1.5 that we had to play with. We ran some numbers. So what we've done is the spreadsheet actually has the ability to show the impact. So if we added 348 or reduce the 348 to the tax levy by additional 348,000 this year, we would be at 757 as an example. And if you scroll down, Aaron, it just shows the impacts just to the taxpayer also, right? So you're on a $178,000 house for $27, but when you look at that $100,000 of assessment for every $100,000 of tax levy reduced, a $757,000 reduction is a $15 impact to the taxpayer, for example, right? Can you change that 757 to 348? Yeah. Oh, I got told. Did you get told?
Total.
Yeah. Okay.
It's 409 plus 308.
Yeah, but what's the impact of the decision now? Because we already have 409 in there. Understand what I'm saying?
That is the difference between that and that.
I understand that.
Yeah. So you want this just to be 348? I can do that.
Yep. Because the 409 is already in there, right?
Councillor Penny, just while you guys are bouncing around
Yeah,
numbers
sure.
there, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, we wouldn't want to use that 1.5 this year. I mean, if things don't improve again next year, then we're going to be doubly down. But to spread it out over a few years, I think would be great. And if we have 1.5, I'd be very comfortable to see if we use a third of that this year, 500,000 additional, and hopefully everything on the horizon looks like things are going to improve for the average resident within a year. So, they'll see a savings this year, and we won't be left with a big, drop in the bucket next year. But 500,000 reduction, I think, would be a good news story to all residents.
So,
Sorry,
ahead.
are you suggesting a $500,000 additional or 5,000 overall? Because we're at we're 409 right now. So are you looking at?
409. So we're at 409 right now,
Yep.
but you're saying that there's 1.5.
There's about
Additional?
it's about 1.5 additional if council is okay with taking the savings from last year. Bottom line is we had about $1.5 million of additional funds to play with right now because of the grant. And we're going to have an additional $500,000 to $600,000 of council wishes to pull from last year, essentially also because of savings that we saw, right? Which when we talked last year in the budget. So when you factor in the 409, we're sitting with about a 1.5.
That's
rough and dirty. We don't have it fully closed, but I'm very comfortable to suggest we have that.
So yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, 500 on top of the 409. Right,
Okay.
would leave 1 million then for additional years, correct?
Yes, yeah, and what we'll show it as is it'll be shown under, so it'll be actually captured under that financial stabilization reserve, so we can track it separately outside of our general surplus.
That's my take on it.
So, I agree with a lot of what Councillor Penny is saying. I would like to see our total ask less than what 2020 was. I don't know if I'd like to see an entire half a million go into that, and I recognize that no matter what we put in there, we're giving 85% of that, 84% of that goes to industry. So we're not able to stop the increase in the residential taxation with this. But I think the principle of having a stabilization fund over the next couple of years is a good idea. I would be more inclined, Councillor Penny, to use the figure 400,000 and 500,000, but that might be something just to kick back and forth. Councillor Roper.
Yeah, just to further the conversation, I think when we approach anything with the municipality, we have to be realistic. And the reality of our situation is that the revenues are going down, costs go up, even just in regular inflation. So I'd like the budget to reflect that reality. At the same time, whatever we can do to offset it is great, but we don't want that big shock, especially for the next council when they're getting set up. We don't want a big shock to the tax base where things are going to jump substantially. So I'm all in favor of softening the blow, but I don't want to create an unrealistic situation. I don't want to artificially create an artificial situation. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Roper. I agree entirely. Councillor Gerwing.
Yeah, I very much agree with Councillor Roper. Just had to say, I think if we have a surplus from last year's budget, that should be put in this year's budget. We took the money from the community, and so I think it really needs to be reflected and used in this year's budget. So am I right in saying that that was about 400,000, or what was the surplus from last year's?
So the general surplus, we don't actually have calculated yet, and that won't be done until the actual financial statements are. And typically when you tax, you don't take your surplus from one year to the next and put it in your operations. It's not a good practice. So yeah. That's not a typical, that is not a typical practice that we do, mainly because you also need to ensure you have cash flow to deal with other items and so that keeps your cash in the bank and deals with some of the, I'll call it the owies that may occur. So each year that surplus doesn't get rolled over. Last year was a unique year. And when we talked about the budget, we said that, so that's why I'm suggesting we would take some of that surplus out. And what we looked at is when you looked at the savings that were created because of COVID, it's to the tune of $600,000. Okay. Give or take. So we would take that 600 and we would apply it to that. You can count, you can, if you wish, you can use it this year or whatever, but either way, we reflect it in that stabilization fund. So from a financial perspective on our end, we're not mixing and matches general surplus with other cash. We're separating the two, right? So we're suggesting based on additional funds that we would have to offset additional expenses with due to the COVID, and with those additional funds we received from the province to the tune of 1.5. In addition to that, because we've used some last year and we're going to use the remainder of this year at the end of the day. but we were able to take some of those funds from last year's surplus, which is linked to the expenses that weren't utilized last year as due to COVID.
So,
Which is to the tune of
So,
about
I
six
just wanna
or
finish-
six. Pardon
Sorry.
me?
I just want
Go
to
ahead.
finish my point.
go ahead, Councilor Goring.
I think we're saying the same thing. I think maybe I used the wrong words, but if we've got whatever amount wasn't used from last year because of COVID, and whether that's the 400 or the 600 or whatever that is, I think that it should be reflected in this budget. But I also very much agree with Councillor Roper has to say about, we don't want to set up the next council for for a tax increase, because the funding from whatever government we're using right now, or for whatever pot of money we're using to reduce our overall levy, we don't want to set up the next council to where that money's run out. And so then, whoa, all of a sudden reality sucks, right? And we don't want to be reducing service levels. So is there something that we can do based in reality? But as well, I very much believe that if we've saved money from one year, that should be reflected in the forthcoming years, because it's from those residents that we took the money, right? Like I get the feelings about reserves and all of that, and I agree. But I also believe that if I took $1 from you and I didn't need that $1, I should give it back to you. So that's how I feel.
So, Mr. Berry, just a little bit of clarification here, and I understand what, to Councillor Goring's point is, if you tax people in 2020 and you don't utilize all that money, you have a surplus at the end of the year. Now, you were saying that you don't use that surplus for a certain purpose. Where do those funds end up?
General surplus.
So it's in general surplus. So what is general surplus used for? It does not, you were saying it does not offset the levy in the next year?
Typically, when you budget for local government, you budget for the tax year you're in,
Right?
and you levy for the tax year you're in. Then you have reserve accounts set up, as we have set up, to deal with smoothing out costs over time. When you have a surplus, we don't arbitrarily build a surplus, or we don't arbitrarily tax to build a surplus. We tax because basically we're required to provide a balanced budget.
Right.
So but our goal is to not be over budget. So we get very close to the zero, but typically each year we actually come in under budget, and we have the ability to put funds into our general surplus, and that general surplus would slowly build over time. It can be used and has been used in the past partway through the year when council says, oh, when we've had an issue and we haven't budgeted for it, and we've taken it out of general surplus, as an example. And a couple of years ago, we've used it, I don't know about, and Ryan, we'd be able to confirm, when we had some bad debt, we used money from general surplus to help offset some bad debt, because it was previous year's taxes that weren't bad debt being uncollected taxes.
So this unallocated funds that become surplus and go into an account for that rainy day unforeseen. But every year I've been here, we've managed to come in under budget. So every year there's been a surplus in that account. I'm just wondering, if that account builds and builds, then how's it dealt with?
It's not, and it hasn't built and built because it has been used on occasion for certain things. Right?
Okay,
So I'll be blunt. I mean, typically it's been situations where local governments, elected officials have wanted to try to use surplus. It's just not a good practice.
Right.
Because our goal is to build a balanced budget. We're in quite unique times right now. So that's when I suggested last year, and as to Councilor Grooming's point too, last year when we were putting the budget for it was an opportunity where it's not typical where you take from the budget, because you don't build that surplus. I mean, it doesn't have a huge build to it. I mean, because we need the budget based on where we think we're going to be, and we come very close, right? Last year, we saw savings as a result of COVID, to the tune of $660,000 is where we have it tracked currently, right? It would make sense that you would take those $660,000 and put them back into or as part of this year's budget. It's not a typical process, but neither is the current pandemic. So that's I think where Councillor Goring was getting to, and where I would say we would take those funds, remove them out of that general surplus and put them into that financial stabilization fund.
Okay.
And then council can use it when and how they wish. I mean, if you wish, and I wouldn't recommend it based on your discussions too this year. And we additionally have, there's also those funds that helped create more of a surplus last year because of the funds that we utilized for the, because it reduced our expenses, which the BC Restart Fund. So additionally, we would take those, right? So that's where we're sitting with that value we're talking about now, right?
So Councillor Gerwin, I guess to put it in perspective of a family, it seems like what Mr. Barry is saying is that if your family was budgeting for something and you ended up with a surplus at the end of the year, it goes into the rainy day fund. You can't take it and put it into the grocery fund. So that's sort of the analogy that I get from what Mr. Barry is saying. I guess if you're short of groceries, you can go in there and dip into it, but it sounds like it goes into a rainy day fund, which is our surplus fund. Any more comments, Councillor Gerwin?
Yeah, I would just like
Go ahead.
to remark back on what you said. So I understand that concept. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I understand the concept. I see the $660,000 as costs that we didn't have to bear because of COVID. So I also understand the whole point about the levy, and I agree with all of that. I don't want to set up this artificial lower levy and then have a next council be, confronted with something that would be unappetizing to everybody. So I guess I'm just encouraging us all to think about and look at a way to use that $660,000 in this year's tax, maybe not to reduce the levy, but maybe, I don't even know, I'll just throw this out here. Maybe that could be used to reduce bad debt that could then would reduce levy in a future year. I just feel that it should be utilized in some way during this tax season, because we saved money in this tax season because of COVID.
Mr. Barry?
So the bottom line, to try to simplify the numbers for council is you've got about $1.5 million of additional funds because of the BC Restart, and the discussion around 660,000, which would go into that bucket, which we're suggesting is that stabilization fund. So you're out of that, $409,000 has already been used. So you're going to reduce that, say, arguably that $2.1 million from the 2.1 million. And I'm using estimates because we don't have the year closed yet, and you won't have the actuals until we have the audited financial statements. But I'm going to use rough numbers and say 2.1 minus 400, you're sitting at 1.7. Well, 400's already used. And that's the reason why I brought the discussion up, because it would make perfect sense then to, if council wishes to use additional funds out of that 1.7 that's left over. Councillor Penny suggested $500,000. You suggested 400, and Councillor Goering is throwing some other numbers around, which would reduce the levy from the current 21,454 to wherever you want with those additional funds. So if those funds whatever funds aren't used, we would continue, and we would take that that reserve fund forward to next year, and council would have the same discussion until the funds are essentially completely utilized. Right?
Councillor Penny?
Just to further to that, I mean, I just feel that this has been an exceptional year. We were already been hit hard for the last 6 years. And this last year, I mean, it's really taken a toll on people. And without a doubt, I wouldn't want to see us, set the next council up. I don't want to see us frivolously throw this in without having any, keeping the surplus. But I definitely feel we need to use a good chunk of it to really show the community that we're doing what we can to lower their taxes. It's very unfortunate that we can't just give it all to residential. You know, not that I want to be harsh on industry either, and being a business owner, saving business tax would be great too, but it's to the regular resident right now that so many of them are just hanging on. I mean, we know we have this project that's hopefully going to, you know, bear fruit here soon, and our community should start to take a little bit of a tick upwards, but that's why I'd come up with that number of 500,000. It's a third, so that gives us 2 more years to utilize. You know, if next year we don't see that we need it, if things look good, then it can still stay in a surplus and so on. But anyway.
Councillor Gerwin.
And that's what I was trying to get at, is maybe there's a way, and I don't have the answer right now, but maybe we can all go away and think about it. Maybe there's a way to utilize these funds this year that would be very helpful and beneficial to residents in our communities, and not used to create an artificially low levy setting up next councils. I don't know. I'll leave that with you money people. I don't know. You know it way better than I do, but maybe there's something, like I said, maybe we know of future bad debt that's coming our way that, you know, is going to continue to cause residents of Northern Rockies to have to pay for that. Like, I don't know. I don't have any other ideas than that, but maybe you all do, and maybe you don't.
So the bad debt piece, yeah, there's going to be continued bad debt. I mean, we know what's occurring out in the hinterland, and we know that companies that are going to receivership and things like that. So there's going to potentially be continued bad debt. That's your levy. That gets added to your levy.
Yeah.
So
Right.
unless we were to take it. So that's where it comes into that reserve piece. So
Yep.
so it comes down to simply the budget piece is the expenses minus revenues. Left with your levy, the more revenues you put in. This is a revenue. The unfortunate thing, as was communicated, and this is why we wanted to show this, is you know, you can give back $1 million to the community, but $59,000 to the community as a whole, to the region. $59,000 goes back to the resident, 99,000 goes back to business, and 850 is to industry, right? So the levy gets reduced, but you know, the residential taxpayer doesn't see the significant change. It changes their, you know, if your house is valued at $178,000, you see a $37,000 reduction is what the impact is, right? But essentially, that's the mechanisms we have to play with.
Councillor Roper, you had a comment?
Yeah, so we're talking about how, you know, people are barely hanging on, and we know that there's a lot of businesses in town that are suffering. Maybe there's a way we can gather some more information just to find out exactly how people are being impacted right now. This second wave has been really devastating, more so than the first. And maybe once we get that information, we can find out, you know, exactly where people are suffering, and maybe there's a way that we can help allocate funds to really help the town get through, not just our own organization, but for the town in general. So we should be considering, you know, the specific circumstances of our businesses and people when we consider where to allocate funds.
When we when we allocate those funds, they still show up as an expense, so it doesn't change what you see and what's before you right now, right? That's the thing, right? So you can say, you know, we want to make a $50,000 donation to X. We want to, you know, it's still an expense that will be shown in the budget and broken out as a levy and broken out this way, right? So I think we're all talking the same thing. It's just, you know, it still comes down to, you know, when we chatted last year, and I made the comment last year about the importance of having a budget that we were comfortable going through the year with, which I think I thank council for supporting that, and council went and promoted that to the community. So that we actually didn't post a deficit last year, right? We were financially in a good position where other organizations weren't, unfortunately, in our neighboring communities, for example. And I use a comment, it's an opportunity for council this year to give back to the community. And I think that's what the discussion is generally there. It's just, where do you land on that number? And there's no magic wand to say what the right number is. It's just having a level, you know, being cognizant of the fact that for future years, you don't want to have that rebound effect either. Next year or the year after, so you can kind of smooth that out, because, you know, you see the levy prior to us applying anything was 20.8 million, right? That was the original levy, and we're sitting currently at at 21.8 million. We're currently sitting at 21,454. So anything added to that reduces that. And you know, the suggestion that was made, and I think we're talking the same thing as landing that number is what's a reasonable number that does give back, that you can communicate to the community overall. It's important to understand what the impacts are, but also doesn't create that rebound effect a year or 2 or 3 down the road, because the funds have been used to smooth out and you bounce back, right? So I think council is talking generally the same thing. It's just it's landing on what you feel is a reasonable amount to sit with. So,
All right, I think if council is fine, we'll leave it there, and I will, there's no other comments. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Oh, Mr. Barry?
so there is, I mean, you're going to the public, the document, whatever we decide today. So right now we haven't decided anything. Is sitting at 21,454 because we have applied $400,000 to the levy. This document is going, whatever council decides or doesn't decide, is what's going to go to the public as part of the public engagement piece next week, which are going to increase this number by close to $100,000 because of the TAC requests, the coalition, and the and SARS, an additional request from SARS. So the council can change the number later. You can add more to it, you can take more away, but you might want to consider, if you are looking at using previous funds, and we can reconvene, you can think about it, and we can have another discussion. But when you have the conversation with the public, it'd be good to know what that number approximately is, because if it looks like it's going to be better than the 21,454 versus where it is currently, plus the $70,000 or $80,000 of additional asks, it'd be good to be able to reflect a number or communicate a number that reflects what you think it might be at, right? So,
Councillor Penny.
So we're dealing with about 2 million, roughly.
1.7, we'll say, after you factor in your 409. We've already applied that.
I'm including the 409, so it was
Yes, yeah.
on 200. So if we wanted to smooth this out, we want to give back to the community, give back some, and we want to make sure that we don't set up a future council to, drop the ball, and we just divided it up over 3 years. It would give us about 670,000. So that would be an additional 260 on top of the 409. Just something to consider.
No, I think is the 409 has already been taken into account. So we're talking.
Yeah. I think your number is 348. You guys are suggesting. I'm just looking at spreading it out. We're going to spread it out.
Turn your mic on.
I'm just saying, if we're going to spread it out, we might as well spread it out evenly. So I know picking 3 years, I mean, really, the community's going to be here a lot more than that, but I don't know. If we're going to try to come up with a number, that would be easier. 260.
And I know we're having the open house next week, but we do have 3 people missing from council, so it's kind of hard to make a decision.
So we have a tentative for Friday.
Yep.
Did you want to kind of sit and chew on it and think about it? And if you have some conversation, you want to give me a call or chat or whatever it might be, and we can, if there's availability, we can just reconvene and chat about it Friday. Is that an option?
Sure. Councillor Penny, when you brought up the 500,000 and I brought up the 400,000, I was thinking that this was without the 409 figure. What I'd like to see is the tax levy brought down close to what the previous year's tax levy was. And I think that would be about $400,000. Am I correct? Of the 1.7, if you utilize 400,000, you would bring the 2021 tax levy down to
Yeah, I guess 2020 is 21,246. 21,246 is your 20.
So,
208, but you're 208.
all right, but we're gonna add 100 to that, aren't we, with the,
So your 280, your 286 rough and dirty is where your difference is when you add the.
but you're gonna add $100,000 to that
That's
because
where I
of
added that. So you're about 286
286.
over last year's levy.
Yeah.
Currently with the 409 applied.
So,
When you factor in those other, the TAC and the other one.
so this is where I was coming in with the $400,000. It would be just slightly under last year's tax levy. That's all I'm saying.
So apply an additional 400. That's what you're suggesting.
Are there any more comments, councillors? We'll reconvene on Friday then and take up this conversation. Councillor Gerwing.
Could somehow the council people that are missing today, can they somehow get informed on this so that we don't rehash the same explanation? Or maybe
Yes.
we should, I don't know.
So Councillor Andrews was going to watch the full program anyway, but I'll connect with the other councillors and ensure that they are aware of where we're at with this part of this discussion.
Great, thank you.
And are we good for Friday? Everyone?
Yeah, we don't have anything on Thursday, right?
No, we originally had something, but then there was a conflict with the mayor's schedule, which we had to change some things around. So we canceled Friday or Thursday. So Friday we still have, we can hit the ground running Friday at noon if that works and have a discussion. And we can provide some documents too in terms of, I mean, you're seeing it here, but sample property impacts for each $100,000 of change, for example, or something like that. But I'll connect back with the other councilors for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's a 10th.
All right, in that case, there's nothing else. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried, and we are adjourned.
Have a great day.